Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much for speaking with me. This show was amazing. It was so much action. You as a superhero, and your character, Brandon, is basically the heart and soul of what ends up becoming the Jupiter legacy that comic book fans know.
Yeah.
So this is the backstory till we lead to that hot messness of what ends up becoming.
So the comic books.
Yes, the comic books. So because this didn't exactly copy the comic books, because everything is what happens before, as an actor, this is kind of new and original that you end up creating. How was you able to kind of step into the character, kind of knowing what happens ahead, but not knowing what happens in the present?
So for me, I didn't really know that we were going to be approaching Brandon as this more earnest and naive kind of character that he is within the series. When I booked the job, I thought I was going to be playing as he is in the comic books. So to approach the character as he is was really fun for me, because there are definitely elements of Brandon which I see in myself. So to be able to bring those from the page to the screen was one of the easier things for me in the whole process. And as you say, have this completely original to play with was both daunting but incredibly exciting at the same time, because as with other superhero series, you have people who have played Batman or Superman before and things like that. For me, I got the chance to be a completely original character, and that was really exciting. So for preparation, I obviously read all of the comic books multiple times over, and I did as much script preparation as I possibly could. So I would break down all of the scenes that I was in and think about what sort of emotional state I would need to be in, what would come before and after that, and how that would inform Brandon's emotional journey and his relationships with other people throughout the series. I also had to do a big amount of physical prep for the show. I put on about 30 pounds of muscle before we started shooting, to fill the superhero aesthetic. I mean, I had a muscle suit as well, so that's not all me, unfortunately. But yeah, there was lots of different elements into going into creating the character. But Brandon throughout the series is quite sad, and he's quite downtrodden. So to play that emotion a lot made me feel quite sad as an actor in certain places as well, because you'd think about this guy's relationship with his father and his sister and all of this pressure that's placed upon him, and you think to yourself, it's like, wow, I really don't envy this guy. So I would end up feeling quite sad going through some of these scenes. And then of course in episode 2, where you've got the funeral sequence as well, I remember prepping that scene. I'd made a playlist of really emotional songs, so when I was going to be filming it, I could listen to that music and get myself into the correct emotional state. But I was sitting in a coffee shop in Toronto, and I must have looked so like sad. I think I was on the verge of tears, kind of writing out some of these notes alongside the script. So yeah, the whole experience was just incredibly fun and very new for me as well, because this is by far the biggest project I've ever worked on. But the things I had worked on before helped me to be prepared to go into something like this, I suppose. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, it does. Absolutely. So also what this show in season 1 tackles is the relationship between Brandon and Sheldon and the code, and how you're kind of the bridge between the old and the new way of doing things. And to me, tell me if I'm wrong or right, it kind of feels that Sheldon relies too heavily so much on the code that he doesn't see that his son is trying hard to step into his shoes, and that if, not to say he would abandon, but if he was to kind of see Sheldon for what he's doing instead of the code being at the forefront, do you feel that the relationship between Brandon and Sheldon would have improved, and you wouldn't have that sadness and burden always trying to feel like you're not doing what's right?
Yeah, absolutely, because Brandon and Grace his mother, they have a much better relationship, even though you don't see that much of it. And that's something that if we get a season 2, I want to explore a lot more of, to see this really strong connection between Brandon and his mother, and then especially knowing what we know within the comics, to reach that moment of terribleness, I'll say. Not even a word, but to get to that point, I really, really want to see the emotional struggle for Brandon. And Grace has a great line within the show where she says something along the lines of, well, if he hadn't broken the code, then we'd be lying there right next to his friends. Like, we wouldn't be there. So she understands where Brandon is coming from. Perhaps she doesn't condone, perhaps she doesn't support his actions, but she understands that his actions meant them being alive or them being dead. And Sheldon is a lot more black and white about it. He'd rather be dead than break the code, and he would rather his son die than he break the code, which is where we have that moment at the end of the series as well, where Brandon's like, are you serious, man? Are you actually going to let me die for the sake of this outdated and perhaps ambiguous set of rules that you live your life by? So I think if Sheldon was more like Walter, then he would not struggle as much as he does at the position of power, as it were, because everyone else seems to understand that there needs to be some sort of flexibility, or there needs to be some sort of progression for the code to work in the modern world, because the way that it worked in the past, it can't work the same way now. So I think if Sheldon thought a little bit less about the code and a little bit less about people being superheroes, and thought about people as more humans and people, then he'd be a much better dad.
Right. Do you feel that for Brandon that he's easy to manipulate, or was it at that moment when he was with his father, was like, oh, you would choose, you really would kind of choose the code before me and let me die in that moment? Do you believe that was the breaking point, or is he just easy to manipulate when it comes with the whole Walter situation?
So I think the way we've told the story so far, Brandon is certainly impressionable, and he's very much a sheep with regards to what his parents have told him, and all he has ever wanted to be and all he wants to be is his father, and that's why he lives his life pretty much blow by blow in the same way as his father does. And he starts to realize, as his friends tell him, as his sister tells him, that you can't live your life like that, because A, he doesn't see you for what you're actually worth, and B, he is not living his life the right way, so why would you want to emulate that? So I definitely say he's impressionable, but getting to this point at the end of the series, it's also very important to note how powerful Walter is and how easily he can manipulate people. So Brandon, of course, can be manipulated, and I think as he goes on and as he becomes more and more disillusioned by his father and becomes more angry and resentful, then that opens up Walter's channel to manipulate him even more. But I think where we leave the series, Brandon is at a point where he's like, right, well, I'm going to live life for me now, and stop living it for my dad. And Walter can see that, and that's what he's gonna leech on, hopefully, if we get into season 2. And then we know what's to come if we read the comics. So that's what I'm really, really keen to play out.
Now, can we talk about the suit? Because in the comics, the character doesn't have a suit. And you have a suit. One, what was it like to put on the suit? And two, do you feel that the suit for Brandon really means that he is part of this team, part of this family? Or does that not have any kind of symbolism to him by the end of the season?
First of all, the suit was absolutely incredible to wear. Liz Wolfe, our costume designer, she did such an amazing job, and I think everyone looked beyond incredible. These suits were so beautiful and they were so intricate. My favorite was Josh's, because you have these constellations on, like, embroidered into the suit, and that's taken from the earlier part of the series in terms of him finding his way to the farmhouse and all of that kind of stuff, which is so intricately just placed into the fabric of not only the show but into his costume as well. So to wear the costumes just imbued such a sense of character immediately. It was amazing. It was like you didn't even have to try and act like you're a superhero just because you feel like one immediately. You've got the cape, you've got the boots. It changes the way you stand, it changes the way you walk. So that was definitely a bucket list moment for me, and something that I'll never forget. And then in terms of the suit being and Brandon being a part of the union, I think he definitely is. I think of the people within the younger generation, Brandon is the person who is most there, because he is the person who follows the code so strictly. Sorry, it's just started tipping it down with rain outside. Just had to close my window. He is the person who follows the code the most strictly, and is probably, as you say, the bridge between the older generation and the younger generation. So not only does he carry the weight of that, but he's also got the pressure of living up to his father's expectations and potentially becoming the next utopian. But something that was really lovely that Liz Wolfe spoke to me about was the fact that she envisioned Brandon having created his own costume almost as like an ode to his father. So you see the similarities between the crests on the chest, and Brandon's is a bit more modern and metallic, and then Josh's is like the classic American eagle. So it's similar, but it has its own elements of modernity to it as well. Like Brandon's has got a bit more armor and things like that, so it seems a little bit more practical in a sense. And I just love that idea from Liz that Brandon is such a fanboy of his own father that he's made his own super suit from scratch to then follow in his father's footsteps. So yeah, I'd absolutely say that he fits into that place within the Union. But by the end of the story, by the end of part one rather, I think he's really, really questioning whether he continues with this, whether he can continue with this, because he's seen his father essentially weigh up his life and not made a decision to save it. So where we leave Brandon, he is in a very, very vulnerable position, and that's why Walter is so keen to sink the claws in and take control.
How do you feel Jupiter's Legacy kind of separates itself from the other superhero shows? There's a lot of superhero shows out there.
For me, it's all about the family drama. Obviously, you have elements of that within other shows, but I think with ours, it's almost more of a drama than it is a superhero and an action story. There's just as much intense dialogue scenes and family relationships as there is action sequences and flying and laser beams and all of that kind of great superhero stuff that we see in everything else. But what you've also got is the generational element to it, how it's this 100 years in the making story, where you've got the history of the Wall Street crash, and then you've got the present day, and how Mark has written it to echo elements of real life as well. I think is very smart, because not only does an audience member get drawn into these real human relationships, it's not just all fighting and things like that, but also the similarities, politically speaking, between the world that they're living in and things like abuse of power and making decisions without due process. all of those are very reminiscent of the world we live in today. So I think to see more of that is where our show stands out potentially.
Right. Do you also kind of feel that Brandon is underappreciated in terms of, because Brandon killed Black Star, which was the clone, all of what's going on would have never really been revealed. We would have never known he was a clone. So do you feel in that aspect that he, even though killing is wrong, it kind of played an important part?
I think it definitely plays an important part because it's the catalyst for the younger generation, especially, but also members of the older generation, to question the validity of the code and to really ask themselves the questions: is this the correct thing that we should be living by, or does it need to be updated, or do things need to be more flexible to make so people can make those choices? You have the great moment in episode 6 with Grace, where she has the fight with Barrion in the warehouse, and she's going through pretty much the same quandaries as Brandon is. You know, she's deciding, well, this person has taken the life of one of my teammates, so what am I going to do about it? Am I going to kill them, or am I going to stop? I think for Brandon, it was more black and white than it was for Grace, because it was his parents. He had just seen his friends die right in front of him, right, and he thought no more. Whereas with the situation with Grace, as the leader, or one of the leaders of this group, she couldn't be the one to do that. So yeah, Brandon is definitely a person to kickstart all of these questions. And it's interesting how the scenes come back to him as well. You've got the scene with Brandon and Grace on the farm, and how he's asking, well, what's the point of the code if no one's going to listen to it? And you've got the scene with Petra and Brandon as well, where she's talking about thinking about giving up, and Brandon says, well, you can't give up, because then others will follow you. And that's the reason that he hasn't, I think, at that point, because deep down he still believes in it, even though it's incredibly frustrating to him that his father or his parents can't see what he did as even a slightly good thing. It's right. just completely one or the other for Sheldon.
If there is a season 2, is there a particular character that you would love Brendan to interact with?
Hutch. I said this in a previous interview, I'd love to have just like a little comical scene between Brandon and Hutch, where Hutch shows up at the farmhouse or something, and Brandon's just sat watching TV or having a beer or something, and Chloe's for some reason back at the house or whatever, and getting ready to go out, and there's just a moment between Hutch and Brandon where they're sat on opposite sofas. It would be a moment like, so my sister, and like Hutch is like, yeah, your sister, and then they leave, or something like that. Right. I think a little funny moment like that would be great. Whether it will happen or not, I don't know, but I'm gonna put it out there into the universe and hope that I'll get a little writer's credit or something like that if we get a season 2.
Very nice. And how do you think that Brandon would feel about his mom? His mom is not so with clean hands as well. She ended up killing someone as well. So do you think that would strengthen their bond, or would kind of cause more of a family chaos?
It's difficult, because Grace is kind of between a rock and a hard place between Brandon and Sheldon, because Sheldon is so obstinate and he is so glued to that particular way of thinking that if she did do that, then what would that mean for their marriage? Would that mean that he has to leave her, or that they can no longer be Lady Liberty and the Utopian because they're the ones who have broken the rules? But I think because I think Grace almost kills Barrion, but she doesn't quite. There's a line where she says Barrion gets to live. So I think she's basically beaten him within an inch of his life, but not quite killed him. And I think it's that she has the knowledge and the experience to know that taking a life won't change what has happened. And I don't think that that's what Brandon necessarily thinks at the beginning of this series, but he knows that it's necessary to save their lives. I think what the position that Grace is put in is that if she does this, then there's no going back from there. Whereas if she goes so far, she can teach the younger generation still that there is a lesson to be learned, that, you know, you still don't take a life regardless. So I think Brandon's position with Grace doesn't necessarily change, because I think they're kind of on this level trajectory the entire way through. And that's something as well that I'd love to see more of if we get a season 2, is more of Brandon and Grace's relationship play out, and see how deep their connection is, because again, the payoff to see what happens to Grace and that Brandon is you know, behind that with Walter, just makes it all the more heartbreaking. So yeah, I'd love to see something like that.
And lastly, with Brandon, there's a lot of different superpowers that's going on, a lot of different superheroes, supervillains. Yeah. What power do you would have loved to have explored? Because I know that you have the telekinesis, super strength, the laser eyes, which we'll see down the line, is very important.
Yeah.
But is there a particular power that you think would have also fit in with Brandon?
I would love the teleportation power that Hutch has, but I don't think it's not in the same wheelhouse.
Right.
But if there was another power that Brandon could have, which would fit with the rest, I don't know. Something really cool, like I forget his name, but the guy in Deadpool, you know, who turns metallic.
Cyborg.
Something like that.
Something like that. Not Cyborg. Cyclops.
Not Cyborg.
Wait, I'm forgetting my own. But he turns into the whole metal thing.
Yeah. But in, the Russian guy, the
Colossus.
Colossus. That's
there
it.
We go.
Like a power like Colossus, but you wouldn't necessarily see it as the metallic thing, but just that complete invincibility, essentially, because that's something which we don't see from our heroes. Obviously they can die, so to see a superhero who is basically like Thanos level, essentially completely indestructible, and has that kind of black star power, to see a big showdown like that, I think would be amazing. But hopefully we'll see a big showdown in season 2 regardless. So
I'm excited.
Yeah,
can't wait. Thank you so much for speaking with me.
No, thank you, Dana. It's been lovely.
No problem.
Take care.
Nope, you too.